Alright everybody, welcome to another Commander deck tech. This time we're going to be looking at a card that has a very fond place in my heart. It took me a while, but once I saw this card was leaked, I immediately told myself, that's my next Commander. For a couple reasons. First off, it's in colors that I haven't really combined together yet, and they actually happen to be three colors that I really love in Magic. So, red, blue, and green are just really fun as a combination. It feels like you're like tapping into I want to say like nature, but like in the purest form. You know, you have the oceans, the forests, and the mountains, and you don't have like black or white colors, which usually tend to lean towards like justice or dark magic or anything like that. So this kind of just focused more on like the natural aspects of it. So we're going to be looking at Xyris the Writhing Storm as a commander for this deck. So this card costs 2 green, blue, and red. And it's a 3/5 with flying. It's a Snake Leviathan. Whenever an opponent draws a card except the first one they draw in each of their draw steps, create a 1/1 green snake creature token. So basically, every time your opponents draw an extra card for some reason other than like the card that you're entitled to every turn, you get a 1/1 snake. And those can add up pretty quickly. A lot of Commander has to do with, replenishing your hand or, drawing 12, 13 cards in a turn. If you're going to do that and do some power plays, I'm going to gain some snakes out of it. And the other ability, which is also very important, whenever Xyris, the Writhing Storm, deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each draw that many cards. So that's another great ability, especially on a flyer. So this is kind of like a group hug deck in a way where you help everybody out to some degree, and hopefully you can gain more benefits from the group hug than anybody else, and no one's going to try to throw a wrench in your gears because you're kind of helping them out as well. So, you can even use this guy politically, like, hey, do you want to draw some cards? If so, leave me alone for 2 turns. Or, something of that nature where you can help someone out, or just do a strategic attack towards a player that actually wants to draw cards and won't mind taking the 3 damage. So that's pretty much what Xyris does. This deck is built a lot around wheels, but it's not around wheels that you would consider like unfair or oppressive or anything else like that. There's a couple cards in here that might take advantage of that, but nothing in this deck is really like over the top, and when you get beat by this deck, it's one of those things like, yeah, you let me generate 45 snakes. Of course you deserved to be crushed by this deck. So there's nothing in this that's really like too insane or too oppressive or anything else like that. Playing against friends, aside from this deck just miraculously going off like turn 5, turn 6, they've had some pretty fun playing around with it, and it's been very like interactive and grindy, and to me that's what Magic's all about. So with that said, let's just jump right in and start looking at the cards. Alright, so we're going to kind of sort them by their casting cost. The first card actually doesn't have a casting cost, so it's 0, so we're going to get that out of the way, but it's also a good introduction to exactly what this deck is about. So Wheel of Fate, it's a red card. Suspend for 4 mana, 1 and red. Basically, not 4 mana, it's suspend 4, it's 1 colorless and red mana. So rather than pay this card from your hand, pay 1 in red, remove from the game, and basically every upkeep it ticks down a number from 4 until it hits 0, and then the card gets played. So this is kind of like a good setup card for later on. But the main idea or the effect of this spell is each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. So let's do the math. We have Xyris, and we also have Wheel of Fate that goes off. Each opponent discards their hand and draws 7 cards. If we have 3 opponents, we're looking at 21 snakes. That's a lot. Like, a lot. Especially what goes on in the deck. And that's really what this whole deck is about. You generate a large number of snakes, and then you do some crazy, wild, wacky shenanigans with it. So, that's what the whole deck's about. Let's just move right into our 1-drops. Alright? We have a Birds of Paradise, a 0/1 flyer, taps for 1 mana of any color. It's a good card to have. Alright, Essence Warden, 1/1 for green. It's kind of like Soul Warden, but in the green version. Whenever a creature comes into play, you gain 1 life. So one of the big things, why don't we gain some life while we generate all of these snake tokens? We have a Brainstorm just for setting up the deck. We have some fetches in here, so that works in nice unison for making cards go away. I threw in a Mystical Tutor as well. I didn't put any, like, I win cards in here, per se. So when you Mystical Tutor and everybody groans and you say, oh no, I'm just grabbing this card, everyone's like, oh. Well, okay, that could have been worse. And it kind of keeps people off your back. Obviously a Soul Ring for ramping. One of the big things, Xyris has 2 mana in its cost, so if you drop a Soul Ring turn 1, you could potentially get Xyris out like turn 2, turn 3 if you get lucky, and Soul Ring's just obviously a commander staple. Wayfarer's Bauble. 1 mana for an artifact, 2 tap, sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land, put it into play tapped, then shuffle. It's a good ramp card, so you have something to do turn 1, and then you also have something to do turn 2 in case you don't get that ideal hand. Obviously, we're going to be skull clamping these snakes for extra draws. You can't not put this card in here. It's just too powerful. All right, we have an Arcane Signet as well. Taps for 1 mana of any color in your commander's color identity. We have each of the 3 signets that are in our commander's colors. So Gruul Signet, Izzet Signet, and Simic Signet. Oh, and we're also into 2 drops, so yeah, that's all right. We're just going to plow through this all. All right, we have a Thought Vessel. You have no maximum hand size, because if you draw 7 cards and then you swing with Xyris, you will have 10 cards in hand, and that's not going to be good either because you don't want to have to discard any of these amazing cards. So it's obviously also just a rock for ramp. Kami of the Crescent Moon, blue for a 1/3. Beginning of each player's upkeep, that player draws an additional card. You drop this on turn 2, turn 3, everybody's going to love you. No one's going to have a problem with it. Same thing for Howling Mine. Each player draws an additional card during their draw phase. Again, no one's going to be complaining. We have Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots for protection for Xyris, because once they do realize what's happening, they're going to want to take out your snake generator. So we need to protect our snake on this. We have a Nature's Lore. I actually found an Ice Age one. I thought it looked pretty cool. Search your library for a forest. Any forest. Could be a shock land, could be a dual land, could be whatever. And put it directly into play. We want to ramp fast into Xyris. We have Narset's Reversal. Blue. This is a really powerful spell. I'm surprised more people don't play these. Copy target instant or sorcery spell, then return it to its owner's hand. You may choose new targets for the copy. So if somebody else plays a ramp card or a really powerful card that like does something amazing for them, I can actually copy it and then return it to their hand so they don't get the benefit. So for example, let's say a Boros Charm makes all your permanents indestructible, and they do that in response to a Wrath effect on the field. You can play Narset's Reversal, the Boros Charm goes back to their hand, and you get the copy of Boros Charm. So you can actually steal a really valid response. All right, we also have Repudiate and Replicate. I love this card. I got my butt kicked with it one time because they made a token of a Eternal Witness, and then they got the Repudiate back, and they were able to keep generating tokens while still keeping Repudiate sitting in their hand, ready to counter an activated or triggered ability, which you would be surprised at how amazing that is. And Replicate, like I said, makes a copy of a creature you control. Molten Psyche, another wheel card. Each player shuffles the cards from their hand and draws that many cards. Metalcraft, if you can control 3 or more artifacts, it does damage to each opponent equal to the number of cards they've drawn this turn. What if you do 2 or 3 wheels, and they drew like 14 or 15 cards in a turn? Now you can hit them for like 15 damage just for like having mana rocks and other types of artifacts out. Pretty powerful. Obviously, the name from the type of cards called Wheels. Wheel of Fortune. Each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. Apparently, this card is stupid expensive now. There are alternatives and other cards that you can use. Yes, this card is like the golden standard, but it also is not worth the amount of money if you're playing for fun. So, yeah, keep that in mind. This card is called Rites of Flourishing. It's 2 in green. I had a Japanese version. I believe it's Japanese. I got these in what I was told are Japanese packs. Basically, it says each player can play an additional land each turn, and each player draws an additional card each turn. So you drop something like this, and let each player draw extra cards and play extra lands, I don't think anybody's going to have a problem with you. Kaseto Oroki Archmage. This card actually came from the commander set that Azori was in. So you may notice the same expansion symbol. 1 green and blue for a 2/2. Pay green and blue. Target creature can't be blocked this turn. If that creature is a snake, it gets +2/+2 until end of turn. My goodness, did they make a synergy that was a match made in heaven? These 2 cards together make your Xyris unblockable so it automatically connects and give it +2/+2, all for just green and blue. It's a ridiculous card, and I knew I had to include it in here. Edric, Spymaster of Trust. 1 green and blue for a 2/2. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents you control, or its controller may draw a card. So basically, you're putting like card drawing bounties on your other opponents, and this really gets everybody off your back again. We have Jace's Archivist, 1 blue blue for a 2/2. This basically has the card Windfall attached to a creature. I didn't include Windfall in here. Something about that card just didn't sit right with me, and it took a while to come in the mail, and I played without it, and I kind of thought I'm okay without it in here. But anyway, pay blue and tap. Each player discards his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way. So you can have discards and extra draws. What you could also do is wait until you have 7 cards in hand, swing with Xyris, get 10 cards, then activate Jace's Archivist, pay blue, tap, each player discards and draws, and then everybody draws 10 cards, so now you make 30 snakes. Whirlpool Warrior, original Apocalypse, actually. This is a card I've had for a very long time. I used to think it was a really bad card, but now it's quite relevant. 2 and blue for a 2/2. When it comes into play, shuffle the cards from your hand into your library, then draw that many cards. So it lets you wheel, so you can get better stuff, but pay red and sacrifice it. Each player shuffles the cards from their hand into their library and draws that many cards. So this is like an instant speed ability to wheel your opponents. Beastmaster Ascension, 2 in green for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks, you may put a quest counter on Beastmaster Ascension. As long as it has 7 or more quest counters on it, creatures you control get +5/+5. You know what's better than 21 1/1 snakes? 21 6/6 snakes. This is usually a game ender card, and it's really, really nice and convenient that it's such a cheap mana cost to play. Speaking of like snakes and building things up, we also have Alpha Status, 2 in green for an enchantment. An aura, enchanted creature gets +2/+2 for each other creature in play that shares a creature type with it. If Xyris is making lots and lots of snakes, well, Xyris is also a snake. So if he makes 21 snakes, Xyris gets +42/+42. That's a game ender, and also you're going to be drawing a lot of cards. In a similar fashion, Shared Animosity, 2 in red. Whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. You got 21 snakes, Xyris gets +21/+0. We're already in lethal commander damage territory. Doesn't matter about them drawing cards. Shaman of the Forgotten Ways. We've had a few games where life totals were like really, really important. So I decided to put this in for 2 reasons. One, first off, if we drop this like turn 3 or somehow turn 2 we were able to like get it out early, we can pay or tap for 2 mana to play Xyris real quickly. It's any combination of colors, so whatever colors you're missing, you can just tap for it. But also we have Formidable, 9 green green tap. Each player's life total becomes the number of creatures he or she controls. Activated if you have creatures with total power 8 or greater. So we're going to use this as well. If I have 21 snakes and everybody else has 2 or 3 creatures, I'm going to change our life totals because, yeah, why not? We also have Riel the Everwise. This is one of the new Ikoria cards that when I saw it, I wanted to make a commander around it, but then it looked a little too oppressive, so here it is in Xyris as one of the 99. It's a 0/3 human wizard. Gets +1/+0 for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. Cool, this might be like a 7/3 or something like that. But the real power is whenever you discard 1 or more cards for the first time each turn, draw that many cards. So I play a wheel effect, discard 5 cards, draw 7 cards, then I draw those 5 cards draw 5 cards from those original ones that I had to discard. That's a little scary if you can do that every turn. I mean, imagine having a hand of 7 and then wheeling it. You draw 7, then you draw another 7. You have 14 cards in hand. My goodness. Chasm Skulker, 2 in blue. Whenever you draw a card, put a +1/+1 counter on it. When it dies, put X1/1 blue squid creature tokens with Island Walk onto the battlefield, where X is the number of counters on Chasm Skulker. Basically, you just make this guy really, really big. You swing violently. Hopefully somebody will kill it. And when it dies, you get that many 1/1s with Island Walk. Just a bunch of other like creature tokens that like, why not jump in and just do some damage and cause chaos. What we can also do with all these creature tokens is use Proteus Staff. 3 mana for an artifact, 2 in blue, tap, put target creature on the bottom of its owner's library. That creature's controller reveals cards on the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. It gets put into play. The rest get put on the bottom. Activate this as a sorcery. So we make a bunch of snakes, and you've seen the creature counts in here. There's not that many of them. You're going to see some more as mana costs go up, but all of these creatures have some sort of like wild utility to it. So if you're disadvantaged in the game, you can start doing a Proteus Staff on your tokens to make some other valuable creatures come into play. Alright, sorry about that, guys, a little hiccup. But anyway, our next card, we have a Whisper Silk Cloak, 3 mana for an equipment. Equipped creature is unblockable and can't be the target of spells or abilities. So with this card, we're just going to protect Xyris. I mean, make him unblockable and also give it Shroud, because why not? I mean, this card is going to be targeted throughout the entire game. You'll notice there's quite the number of protective equipment in this deck. Also, with protection in mind and control, we have a Disallow. I don't run Counterspell in this deck because it's a little bit too powerful in my mind, and I also like the versatility of Disallow. And I also try to use cards that I don't use in like every single deck. Counterspell is like an auto-include in every deck, but if you're trying to have fun and mix it up a little, you don't include every single one. But Disallow, counter target spell, activated ability, or triggered ability. You want to make sure that you have protection against all of these, and Disallow can make it happen. Right, since we're going to be discarding our hand all the time, why not run away to take advantage of the lands in our graveyard? Crucible of Worlds. There's also fetch lands in here. So, you know, if you're running all 5 fetch lands, or 10 fetch lands, or 5 of them, or 7 of them, or even like 3 or 4, you should consider running a Crucible of Worlds if there's some sort of discard mechanic also in your deck, because why the heck not? Crucible of Worlds just lets you play extra lands, so you get a land drop every turn. In some ways, that's better than like a mana rock. If I were to like, you know, run this as like you know, some sort of like Darksteel Ingot or something like that. Instead, I'm going to run away that lets me take advantage of all those lands that I've discarded. Sometimes you run into decks that are not as fun and like goofy and things like that. So sometimes you don't want to give your opponents cards. So Narset, Parter of Veils, combined with these wheels, is a really nice way to have all of your opponents discard the cards in their hand. Sometimes this makes people a little sour, a little upset, a little like discouraged, or, you know, it kills some of the fun factor. But usually I like to keep this card hidden in my hand until like things hit the fan. Like when a problem happens, then I'm going to drop Narset and wheel and try to like limit what my opponents can do. And then what the cool thing is, if I've limited everybody, I can tick down Narset, let it eventually die, and then as I choose, let Xyris swing in and start letting select players draw cards, like ones that aren't threats or ones that aren't going to try to end the game immediately. Narset stops opponents from drawing more than 1 card each turn, so everybody still gets at least 1 card, so they shouldn't be too upset about that. 5 loyalty, -2, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can reveal a non-creature, non-land card from among them and put it into your hand, the rest on the bottom. So, you know, you can grab some artifacts or an extra wheel card or something in the deck that is nice and fun to use. No green deck is complete without an Eternal Witness, but what really makes Eternal Witness shine in this deck, aside from it being foil, is that you're going to be discarding cards. So, oh, I played a wheel and it got discarded? Let's play an Eternal Witness, bring it back to hand, and let's play it again. Or there's a removal card in the graveyard that I need, or, you know, there's a counterspell that I want to get ready for so I can shut down the game. Let's play an Eternal Witness and pull something back. Also, we could Proteus Staff into it, which would be pretty cool. We have a Chaos Warp, a piece of removal. Owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library and then reveals the top card. If it's a permanent, it gets put into play. This is a kind of like last resort, like I need to like remove this thing from the game now. Or it's strategic. I mean, I could, if I'm in a really, really tight situation, Chaos Warp one of my own snakes and get a permanent out of it for free. Krosan Grip, 2 in green, split second, destroy target artifact or enchantment. If you're running green, you have to run this card because that's like one of the best answers that you can have for artifacts and enchantments that get in the way. I threw in a Harrow into here, 2 in green. Additional cost, you have to sacrifice a land. Search your library for 2 basic land cards, put them onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. So this is just a nice way at instant speed at the end of like a turn 3, turn 4. Get Harrow, and then pull like the basics that you need into play for mana fixing. In addition, there's Crucible of Worlds, so you could take advantage of that as well. All right, we have Growing Rites of Itlimoc. This is a enchantment that costs 2 in green. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal a creature card from among them, put it in your hand, put the rest in the bottom. So we're not really trying to fish for this card, because when this card flips is what we really care about. This is basically a Gaia's Cradle. Taps for green or taps for green for each creature you control. If I have 12 snakes out, this taps for 12 mana. That's into my goodness territory of efficiency. Usually when this card flips and people see the number of snakes I have, I become the number 1 enemy and I need to be removed or at least reduced in capability. So I get it, but it's a fun card to run. It flips when you have 4 or more creatures. You're going to have the snakes. Teferi's Puzzle Box. If you paid attention to my channel, I think I uploaded a mystery booster box opening. I don't know if I published it or not. But anyway, this is actually one of the first cards that I cracked open, a foil Teferi's Puzzle Box. It's awesome. Teferi's Puzzle Box, basically 4 mana for an artifact. During your draw step, you draw your card, then you shuffle your whole hand. Oh no, you put it on the bottom of your library, not shuffle. And then you draw that many cards. So if I have 5 cards, I draw my 6th card, everything goes in the bottom, and then I draw 6 cards. So again, we're playing with Xyris as an extra drawing engine. This is going to draw us a lot of extra cards on there. Similar effect, Font of Mythos. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, they draw 2 additional cards. So this is kind of like a double Howling Mine. Again, you play this card, I don't think too many of your opponents are going to hate you initially when it happens. And even on these stationary permanents that draw just 1 or 2 extra cards, the whole idea of it is yeah, we're only going to generate 2 snakes per player each turn, so, we have chump blockers, and it hopefully pulls us into our more powerful spells. Wheel and Deal is a pretty interesting card, especially because it's an instant, because I have had situations where a friend used a tutor to try to find something, and then they put it in their hand. And then they would play another spell before they're getting ready for their big fancy tutor spell. So I will respond by playing Wheel and Deal, make each opponent, or any number of opponents, discard their hand and draw 7 cards. And then we draw a card. So if people are starting to construct their hands, you can at instant speed, reduce what their hand can do. Yeah, you're giving them 7 new cards, but it wasn't that specific card that they wanted. You can play this politically. There's a lot of different things that you can do with here. And the bonus that you get to draw a card as well as at instant speed is pretty nice. This card is pretty cool as well. Commit to Memory. The first part of it is commit, put target spell or non-land permanent into its owner's library, second from the top. So with this, you can actually take their card, whatever they're playing, or a permanent in play or whatever, tuck it into their deck, and then when this card finally hits the graveyard, you are capable of playing Memory, the Aftermath effect. Each player shuffles his or her hand to their graveyard and then draws 7 cards. So you can tuck it into their library, and you can do some really cool stuff play commit in response to a fetch land, so it gets put in but then it gets shuffled, so you don't have to worry about coming back with Memory. But again, 7 more cards, and also sometimes this card will find its way into the graveyard from wheel effects, so you immediately have Memory online and live to go. Alright, since we're creating so many creatures, Purphoros is a no-brainer in this deck. You do a single wheel and you make 21 snakes. Well, if Purphoros is in play, you're doing 42 damage. Good game, everyone. Purphoros is a 3 in red enchantment creature, indestructible. Your devotion to red has to be less than 5, or else it isn't. Or has to be more than 5, or else it isn't a creature. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, it does 2 damage to each opponent, and you can also pay 2 in red to give your creatures +1/+0 until end of turn. In case you want to pump up your snakes, as you're swinging with 21 of them, in case that original 42 damage didn't work, Purphoros has a lot of utility attached to it. Mana Echoes, a real busted card in this deck. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may add colorless to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. You can do some pretty wild stuff, with Mana Echoes. 4 snakes come into play when Xyris is in play. Okay. So Zyrus made 4 snakes, so each snake comes into play, and each snake adds 5 colorless mana. And you just added 20 colorless mana to your mana pool. This card is going to be pretty wild in that sense. Reality Scramble. This is very much like Progenitus Staff, but it does have an alternative utility. So 2 red, for sorcery, put target permanent you own on the bottom of your library, reveal cards on the top of your library until you reveal a card that shares a card type with that permanent. Put that in the battlefield and the rest on the bottom in a random order. So I'm going to tuck a snake under the library, and I'm going to pull out a creature. Again, you've seen all the creatures in here, same thing with Progenitus Staff. But here is where that really wild utility comes into play. The Retrace ability lets you discard a land from your hand to play this card. So if this card gets discarded through a wheel, who really cares? And then also, you're going to have like 7 cards in hand. If you have 2 lands, well, you can only play your first land for the turn. What do you do with your second land? You could actually pitch it to Reality Scramble to get another random creature flipped up from your deck. There's a lot of nice interactions and synergy running like that in here. I threw Anger into the deck just to give creatures haste, just in case I play a wheel. Anger gets discarded, and I'm going to have a mountain when you see the mana base on here. Everything's going to have haste, and all my snakes are going to be able to swing right away. So that's putting some pressure on things. Bident of Thassa, 2 blue for any enchantment artifact. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. If I hit you with 5 snakes, I draw 5 cards. That's awesome. Pay 1 in blue. Creatures your opponents control attack this turn if able. Oh, look, you put a utility creature that's not supposed to be in combat. I'm going to make it attack me, or somebody else. But if you attack me, there's going to be 40 snakes sitting there waiting to block your creature. So I can really push you into trading with me when I lose 1/1 snakes and you lose a 6/6 or whatever else you have. Opposition, 2 blue. Tap an untapped creature you control. Tap target artifact, creature, or land. This is one of the end game cards where you play Zyrus. You let your opponents draw a bunch of cards, and then you also use your snakes to start tapping down their artifacts, creatures, and lands. Just lock down their source of all mana, creatures, utility, everything, and just lock the game into, beatdown time. I guess we'll call it that. War's Toll is a pretty oppressive card that I saw. Somebody told me I should be playing it. I looked at it, immediately loved it. 3 in red for an enchantment. Whenever an opponent taps a land for mana, tap all lands that player controls. So if you're going to play a card in your first main step, all your lands are going to be tapped. If a creature an opponent controls attacks, all creatures that opponent controls attack if able. This is going to force your opponents to attack with everything if they want to. This is kind of like a Pillow Fort card because it makes your opponents really second guess if they want to swing with everything at you. And even if opening up their lands, an opponent tutors up 3 or 4 counterspells in their hand and they think they have the game on lockdown, you play War's Toll and they're not going to be playing all those counterspells. Reforge the Soul, 3 red. Sorcery, each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. And then Miracle, basically, if it's the first card you draw, you play it for free. For the reduced cost, 1 in red. But it's another wheel. It just makes everybody discard and draw. Mystical Tutor makes this a really, really wild card. Time Reversal, 3 blue. Each player shuffles his or her hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. Exile Time Reversal. This card just basically, is another wheel, but it also grabs graveyards and puts them into the library, and then you draw 7. Echo of Eons, 4 blue. Each player shuffles their hand and graveyard into their library, then draws 7 cards. The cool thing is Flashback is just really, really cheap. It's half the cost. So we play Flashback, and oh wait, this card is actually sitting in our graveyard sometimes. So again, we get this really, really cheap Time Twister, basically. And yeah, and the fact that it needs to be in our graveyard, I'm okay with that. But anyway, we have the Well of Ideas, 5 in blue for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw 2 cards. At the beginning of each player's draw step, they draw an additional card. Or each other player, sorry. And then at the beginning of your draw step, you draw 2 additional cards. So yes, this is going to benefit you a lot more. It's probably going to attract some hate because your opponents will be like, why does that player get more cards than I do? I don't like that. I'm going to take care of it. But since it already enters and you draw 2 cards, it's not terrible if you attract a kill spell or a removal spell onto it. We also have the Locust God. 4 blue and red for a 4/4 flying. Whenever you draw a card, create a 1/1 blue and red insect creature token with flying and haste. If that were the end of the ability, this would still be a no-brainer card to put in, but there's more. Pay 2 blue and red, draw a card, then discard a card. And also, when the Locust God dies, return it to its owner's hand at the beginning of the next end step. So this card has a tough ability of even dying. You play it, your opponents are going to hate it out, sure, but it's coming back, and there's not much you can do about it. It's kind of like a sub commander. My commander is a snake that makes snakes, and this commander makes insects, but it's all tokens. So yeah, you draw a lot of cards from the wheels, or you get to play the ability to draw a card, discard a card, or every time it dies, it keeps coming back to your hand. And a couple snake things that'll help us out. This is Seshiro the Anointed. 4 green for a snake monk. Other snakes you control get +2/+2, including Xyrus, and all the tokens that it makes. Whenever a snake you control deals combat damage to a player, you may draw a card. So this is another snake that, another snake enabler that makes you draw, or lets you draw, like an absurd amount of cards. Another snake that will help us out, not specifically snake enabling, but whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, add that much green to your mana pool. This mana doesn't cause mana burn until end of turn. This mana doesn't empty from your mana pool as phases end. So you get to hold on to this for an entire turn with all the mana. So you swing, do a ton of damage, do 15 damage to your opponent, you get 15 green mana, and you can use it for the rest of your turn. It's 4 green for a 3/3, Sakiko, Mother of Summer. I've seen some commander decks that are actually just built around this card, and they're pretty cool. So, yeah. And then finally, the last non-land card that we have is Dragon Mage. This is a card, this has a little bit of sentimental value to me. I know it's not like the ideal version of a card for this deck, but it is 7 mana for a 5/5 beater with flying. Whenever Dragon Mage deals combat damage to a player, each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. So you can just hit with this 2 or 3 times and make a ton of snakes and make all of your opponents groan every time you hit them for 5 and do another wheel on the table. All right, so that's all the non-land cards. It's a pretty fun deck. It's nothing like super overpowered, but there's a lot of good synergy with it. Unprepared decks will have some problems if Xyrus is left unchecked, but you have some ways to protect it as well. Let's move into our mana base. So obviously we need a command tower and a Ketria Triome. I love the Triomes in a 3-color deck because it's just so darn fetchable. If you really need a color, this card solves any answer, even if you grab a fetch land that isn't, within the color that you need. And putting it into play tapped, sure, that's difficult, but if you know you don't need it, it's nice knowing that you have a balancer of all 3 colors that you can fetch whenever you need, just in case you don't need that mana to set up until next turn. We also have a Reflecting Pool. This basically tap, add 1 mana of any color that a land you control could produce. A lot of lands here produce 2 or 3 colors of mana, so we might as well take advantage of that with an additional card like Reflecting Pool. We have 3 shock lands, Stomping Ground, Breeding Pool, and Steam Vents. These basically just, you should know what shock lands do if you're playing Commander. They're fetchable based on their sub-land types, so like an island mountain, and you have to pay 2 life or else they come into play tapped. But since we're starting at 40 life, that's not that big of an issue. We also have 3 check lands. These lands basically tap for 1 mana of either color. They come into play tapped unless you control the basic land that is associated with their 2 colors. So like Hinterland Harbor, tapped unless you control a forest or an island, and it taps for what a forest or an island could make. So these are just nice ways to balance out color. We have the 5 ally fetches, the ones that got reprinted. Not necessarily the really, really expensive ones, but we'll work up to that someday. So we want to throw these in. These are really great for fetching up the Triome or also our shock lands in here as well. All right. A couple of utility lands that we're also playing around with. Halimar Depths, enters the battlefield tapped. Not great, but hey, it works because it gives us the ability to look at the top 3 cards of our library and put them back in any order. So we usually play this turn 1, rearrange our next 3 draws, and it works out quite well. Mystic Sanctuary is also another card that I knew that I had to include in here. It's fetchable. I have enough islands, I have enough cards that identify as islands, and like, the Triome or the Shocklands. So this card will be coming into play untapped, hopefully. If not, we're going to just need to keep wheeling and selectively playing lands, but when it enters the battlefield, if it enters untapped, you can put an instant or sorcery card from your graveyard on top of your library. There's a lot of cards on here that I would love to put back on top to set them up for the next draw, especially if I can use a fetch land to grab the island and put it into play right away. Alright, a couple other utility lands. Mikokoro, Center of the Sea. Legendary land, taps for colorless. 2 tap, each player draws a card. Just a nice way to like emergency generate 3 snakes if I have 3 opponents and I need to make some like chump blockers. Kessig Wolf Run. This taps for colorless. Pay X, red and green, tap target creature, gets +X/+0 and gains trample until end of turn. We're using this basically to pump up Xyris, or ultimately anything, but that's like the main idea for this deck. Rogue's Passage, taps for colorless, 4 tap, target creature is unblockable this turn. I would like to make my Xyris unblockable so there's no chance of it dying. Reliquary Tower, sometimes we're going to draw a ton of cards, just like the Mind Vessel. We want to have no maximum hand size. Oran Reef the Vastwood, comes into play tapped. Again, slow land, but whatever. It taps for green. Or tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each green creature that entered the battlefield this turn. Well, Xyris is green, and all the snakes that Xyris makes are green. So if we play a wheel, and I create 21 1/1 snakes, I get tapped to put a +1/+1 counter on each of those 21 snakes that just came into play. Throne of the High City, taps for colorless, 4 tap, sacrifice it, you become the Monarch. The Monarch basically lets you draw a card at the beginning of your end step, but if anybody has a creature do combat damage to you, they become the Monarch. So they get to draw an extra card. I don't think Xyris is going to have a huge problem with that. Yes, it's going to give them more things to go after, but it's also going to keep people off my back once they hit me once for the Monarchy. But also I have a ton of snakes, so I might as well swing with like 2 more snakes than you actually have, do damage, take the Monarchy, and draw extra cards. Scavenger Grounds is just a good way to get rid of graveyards. Yes, I'll be hitting my graveyard, but I'm not going to pull that trigger unless I absolutely need to. Comes into play untapped. It's just 2 tap, sacrifice a desert. Well, this is a desert, so we're good on that front. And then also we have some very beautiful unhinged lands, including 2 foils that I'm very, very proud of. These are from when a good friend of mine and I decided to get unhinged booster boxes for our friends for the holidays and do a draft with it. But I ended up having some extra leftover boxes because we just needed 1 box instead of the 6 that I bought. They're only like $30 each, so if you're looking at the prices now, you're probably like wondering why I didn't buy more. I have 2 boxes still. But anyway, these lands are just straight up gorgeous. They're very beautiful. They're full art. They just look amazing, and they were included in each booster pack when you bought one. So, yeah. But anyway, that's Xyris. I really like this commander. I've played about 7 or 8 games with it, I think. Maybe a couple more. But all but one of them were extremely fun and grindy, and like everyone was showing off the cards in their deck, and everybody had a good time. This deck doesn't win every time, but who cares? You're having fun and literally throwing snakes at people. Like, it's a good time, and no one really faults you for replenishing their hands or letting them draw an absurd number of cards so they can show off what their deck does. So anyway, that's about it. That is the Xyris deck tech that I built. It's probably around 7.5 on the competitive scale, like 7.5 out of 10, maybe 8, depending on how you view some of the cards in this deck. But it's a very fun deck, and I am very much looking forward to seeing your comments and criticism on it. And if you have any cards that I'm missing that are blatantly obvious, toss them in the comments section, and I'll take a look at them. Maybe I'll do an upgrade in a year or 2 and see what we can do with Xyris. But anyway, hopefully you enjoyed watching, and I will leave a link in the video description that you can use to purchase the precon that includes Xyris and includes a good chunk of the cards that are in this deck as well. So, happy playing, everybody, and wishing you all the best and a very happy and healthy summer. Later.